Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and I am the Math Lab Coordinator, and I am located in room 222 of the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. And this is a second lesson on the order of operations. If you have not watched the first video, you probably need to watch that first podcast. As a brief review, remember that we decided that different operations have different priorities, and that the first thing we should do when we're looking at those operations is that we should do our parentheses and other groupings first. The next thing that we should always do is our exponents. Next in the order is our multiplication and division, and since they have equal priorities, we do those operations from left to right. And the last operations we do are addition and subtractions. And we do those operations, again, because they have the same priority, from left to right. And we can remember those by looking at the first letter of our priorities. Parentheses, exponents, the multiplication and division as ties, and the addition and subtraction as ties, by looking at please, excuse, my dear, Aunt Sally. Let's look at some examples now. And as opposed to the first podcast that was more about teaching you why this worked and how to go, where this came from, and we spent a lot of time on that please excuse my dear Aunt Sally and the emphasis on that part of the lesson. This lesson is going to be more on the examples and how to do those. So let's look at this first example. 3 plus 14 minus 5, all in parentheses, divided by 4. The first thing you should notice on this one is that there is a parentheses, that first order of operations. And I'm going to write that P-E-M-D-A-S right here on the top of my paper. You should have that memorized by the time you're through with this, but if you're having trouble with it and struggling with it, write it down. Visualize it. Don't just try to remember it in your head. Get it visually for yourself. And as we look at this, we're just going to look, and you can't see me cover it up on the board, but we're just going to look at the parentheses part of this problem. And we're going to look at the 3 plus 14 minus 5. As we look at that, we're going to, first of all, do the addition and subtraction from left to right. Now, we can do some of the addition and subtraction as we learn some things about positive and negative numbers and our integers later on. We can do some of the addition and subtraction a little bit different as we get some more tools to look at. But right now, we're just going to add and subtract from left to right, 3 plus 14, and get 17. I'm going to keep this in parentheses. And then I'm going to bring down that divide 4. Then 17 minus 5 gives me 12. And then lastly, 12 divided by 4 is my last step because I finished what is inside the parentheses. Notice that even though the division here has a higher priority, it doesn't have a higher priority than the parentheses. Again, even though the division has a higher priority than the addition and subtraction, the parentheses takes priority over either one. So I do what's inside the parentheses first, and then I do 12 divided by 4, and I get 3. Let's look at the next example. In this problem, we have 12 minus 2 times 4 minus 2 in parentheses. Now you notice I said times, even though there's not a times symbol there. Anytime we have a number like the 2 next to a parentheses, it implies a multiplication. So in this problem, we have an implied multiplication. As you can see, that little green dot appearing. That's an implied multiplication. Now, the next thing we need to do is do the parentheses first, because remember, we're still working on our please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So inside that parentheses, we have 4 minus 2. Notice I wrote that 2 down first because that's really what I'm thinking first is that 2. Now next I'm going to look and bring down everything else, the 12, the subtract 2. Now if I leave it just like this, it's hard to know what operation to put in next. So I'm going to leave the parentheses until I'm completely through with those. And to help me remember what to do here, I'm going to put a little dot to help me remember that that's a multiplication. Again, with a number directly in front of a parentheses and no other operation sign that implies a multiplication. So now I have 12 subtract 2 times 2. And according to my, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, I must multiply and divide everything through before I get to the subtraction. So 12 minus 2 times 2, I need to bring down the 12. I need to multiply the 2 and the 2 and get 4. 12 minus 4 and get 8. Notice my elephant here. How do you eat an elephant? These problems can get very big and very ugly, like a big stinking elephant. So how do we eat these big ugly elephants? These are my elephant problems, or my elephant theory as I call it. How do we eat these elephants? How do you eat an elephant? We eat them one bite at a time. We divide the problem up into smaller, easier digested bites. Because we can do, and I'm going to go backwards here, if it'll let me. See if it'll bring up the, yep. We can do the simple problem. We can do 4 subtract 2. We can do the simpler problem 2 times 2. We can do the simpler problem 12 minus 4. And we can get those answers, as opposed to looking at the entire problem, maybe a big stinking elephant. So how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do we do an order of operations problem? One operation at a time. Let's look at this next problem. It's got a lot of multiplication and division, and this one has an exponent as well. Okay, so there's my please excuse my dear Aunt Sally written at the top just so that we don't forget. There are no parentheses, so the next thing we need to look at is an exponent. And we do have an exponent in this problem. That's 2 to the third. So 2 to the third equals 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Times 2 equals 8. Eight divided by 2 times 5 times 4 divided by 2. Notice everything else is left the same. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. Now remember again, the multiplication and division is done from left to right. Just because I say multiplication first does not mean that I go and do the multiplication part next on the list. I do multiplication and division. They're tied for priorities. My dear goes together. So what do I do next? I do the division, 8 divided by 2, because it comes next as I do the problems from left to right. Multiplication and division gets done as equal priority. 8 divided by 2 gives me 4 times 5 times 4 divided by 2. Then I do the multiplication that comes next as I read from left to right. 4 times 5. 20 times 4 divided by 2. 20 times 4 would be 80. 80 divided by 2 would be 40. And again, we gave those priorities from left to right, proceeding down and across, and as we go across. I want you to notice something else about this problem. Notice as I simplified, I narrowed my problem down so that this problem ended up looking like almost an upside down triangle till I ended up with that bottom answer as a 40. That indicates some good procedure. Okay? That gives me a good procedure and gives me an answer. As I simplify the problem down, it ends up looking like an upside down triangle. Each step simplifying just a little bit more. Again, that elephant. How do I eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do I do an order of operation problem? One operation at a time. Don't jump ahead of yourself. Don't try to do more than one operation at a time. Keep it simple. Notice that there are multiple steps to this problem. When helping students, one of the things I notice is students tend to try to do a whole bunch of operations at once. They try to do them in their head. They try to jump right to the answer. Yes, there are students who can look at this and just jump right to the answer, but that's not the way you should do it. You should show all your work, you should show all your steps, and you should take it one step at a time, just like I've shown in this example. Okay, let's look at the next example. Okay, notice I didn't write this one down, so let's write it down together. Get my pen here fixed. And the example on this one is 7 times 2 minus 4 times 8 minus 5. And again, don't forget your please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And you probably can't read that at home, but write it down on your paper and you can. Okay? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, that is. Now, as we look at this, notice we have parentheses. So we're going to do what's inside the parentheses first. 8 minus 5. 8 minus 5 gives us 3. We're going to bring down the 7 times the 2 minus the 4. 8 minus 5 gives me 3. Then, after we've done what's inside the parentheses, notice I leave the parentheses around it, because until I'm sure I'm through with the parentheses, it's always safe to keep them that one more step. After the parentheses, remember, we want to look for any exponents. There are no exponents. After exponents, we want to look for multiplication and division. As we look for the multiplication, I have one here, 7 times 2. But also remember that there's also a multiplication with the 4 times 3. We do not want to do the subtraction 14 minus 4. We want to go on and multiply the 4 times 3. We could have gone on and did both multiplications, but I wanted to take that extra step just to remind you that there was an understood multiplication right there with that 4 times 3. Then the last is look for our addition and subtractions. 14 minus 12 is 2. Okay, let's look at another example. Four times 2 minus 5 plus 2 times 8 minus 4 divided by 2. Okay, as we look at this one, notice that our parentheses are a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more operations, so this one's really beginning to look like our big ugly elephant. So if you're writing these down at home to do these, take your hand and cover up everything but that first parentheses, so that all you're looking at is that 4 times 2 minus 5. If you could see, I'm literally covering up part of mine so that all I see is that 4 minus 2. In other words, let's just look at that part right there. 4 times 2 minus 5. What is 4 times 2 minus 5? That's one of our simpler problems that we've been working. We know that in that order of operations that we should multiply first and get 8. Then we should subtract 8 minus 5 and get 3. Notice the concentration on just one of those parentheses. Now let's go back and do the other set of parentheses, which was 2 parentheses 8 minus 4 divided by 2. Now I'm going to ignore the 2 on the outside and just pay attention to what's on the inside. We don't subtract first. We always do our multiplication and division before our subtraction. So we're going to do that division. And 8 minus 2 gives me 6. And again, until I'm completely sure I'm through with it, I'm going to keep it inside parentheses. Don't forget that we had a 2 outside of that. So I'm going to go back and put that 2. Now what are we left here with? Well, I'm going to take a different color here and say 3 plus 2. And because there's not an operation in between them, remember that's times. So that's 3 plus 2 times 6. And the order of operation that we need to do next is that multiplication with the 2 and the 6. So that's 3 plus 2 times 6 is 12. That last addition we have left, 3 plus 12 is 15. Again, notice one operation at a time. I even erased out part of the problem to deal with one set of parentheses, then ignored that first set of parentheses to deal with the second set, then brought the two parts together to finish out the problem. Again, my elephant theory, to do the problems, you do one operation at a time, because one operation is a whole lot easier to do than the entire set of operations altogether. Now let's look at one final example. And this one involves a different set of grouping. This one involves a fraction. We have a fraction bar, and a fraction bar, remember, means to divide. And a fraction bar groups the top of the fraction and the bottom of the fraction and tells us to do the top first, then the bottom, and then do the division. So I'm going to do the top first, and on the top we have an exponent, 3 squared, which gives me 9. 1 plus 9 gives me 10. On the bottom, I have 10 minus 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8. 10 minus 8 gives me 2. The last step is to do the division. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Notice on this problem, I don't make it into the upside down triangle like my other ones. I do work it across to help with the diffraction bar so that it's a little bit smoother and goes straight across, so that the work that follows this one follows straight along here, and the work that follows here follows straight along this way. It's a little bit easier to follow that way and a little easier to keep up with your work. So I recommend that for the fractions you work across, but everything else, remember to work down. It helps keep things straight, and if your eye's following your work, you'll see it better, and if you see it better, you're less likely to make mistakes. I hope this helped and gave you a few good examples of some order of operations. Remember, if you need more help, you can find me in room 222 of the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. Thank you for watching.